11 Japanese fighters circle overhead. A solitary Marine Corsair struggles through the heavens, smoke trailing from a ruptured fuel line. The aviator has no height, no velocity edge, no support. The handbook instructs to ascend and flee. He chooses otherwise. He forces the control column forward and plunges toward the sea surface, piloting the way he mastered over Kansas grain fields at sunrise. The Zeros pursue, bewildered, 30 seconds hence. Their attack formation lies in ruins. Rabaul, February 1944. The heavens above the Solomon Islands offer no clemency for errors. It reeks of combusting aviation gasoline and ocean mist. The flight compartment of an F-4U Corsair at 12,000 feet is confined, thunderous, and trembling, with the pulse of 18 cylinders rotating a colossal propeller. The control panel radiates dimly. The stick quivers beneath work-hardened palms. Beneath, the Pacific extends boundless and uncaring, consuming debris without ritual. This is Marine Fighter Squadron VMF 124, functioning from Torquemada Airstrip on Bougainville. They conduct extended-range protection missions deep into Japanese-controlled zones. The probabilities are computed and merciless. Every sortie demands fuel, machinery, and personnel. Substitutes come weekly, inexperienced and inadequately prepared. Some endure 5 missions, some endure a single one. The arithmetic is elementary. Japanese Zeros exceed Marine fighters 3-1 in most confrontations. The Zero ascends more rapidly, maneuvers more sharply, and has pilots with years of battle expertise. American strategy is explicit. Preserve height. Employ velocity and plunging assaults. Never, under any circumstance, turn with a Zero. The regulations are inscribed in sacrifice, perfected over 2 years of Pacific warfare. They function when aviators obey them. Survival percentages rise. Departure means demise. But strategy presumes you possess choices. It presumes you can select when to participate. Over Rabaul in early 1944, Marine aviators seldom possess that privilege. They conduct escort for bombing aircraft, photographic reconnaissance planes, provision flights. They cannot desert their assignments. When Zeros attack them from overhead, they withstand the initial strike and attempt to survive sufficiently long to disengage. Most fail. The noise is what airmen recall. The thunder of the Pratt & Whitney radial power plant at battle power. The clatter of gun cameras operating. The static of wireless communication as aviators announce enemy locations. Hostiles elevated. 3 o'clock. Break leftward. Then the shriek of plummeting fighters. The pounding rhythm of 20mm cannon fire penetrating through aluminum exterior. The liquid sound of projectiles striking tissue. Sometimes the dreadful quietness when a power plant ceases or a wing collapses and a Corsair commences its extended descent toward the ocean. Into this furnace flies an aviator. The squadron designates the farmer. He appears unlike a combatant, elevated, slender, with sun-wrinkled eyes and hams that remember guiding a farm machine before a control column. A graduate of nowhere significant, with a foundation in farming. He communicates in deliberate sentences, as if examining each word for structural soundness. His squadron companions call him unhurried. Some call him careful. He studies obsessively, examines after-action summaries, and poses questions that annoy his commanding official. The winter of 1944 carved profoundly into the frames of every Marine positioned in the Solomon Islands. Temperature-transformed flight garments into perspiration-saturated second coverings. Moisture-clouded eye protection within moments of departing the preparation chamber. Beneath, the wilderness stretched infinite and verdant, concealing destroyed aircraft that would never be retrieved. Overhead, the heavens belonged to whoever possessed height and hostility. This was the pinnacle of the island-hopping operation. Marine Corps aviation had devoted itself to proximate air assistance and bomber protection, a strategy rooted in the conviction that air dominance could be seized through depletion and firepower. In principle, formations of F-4U Corsairs would sweep before bomber streams, eliminate Japanese interceptors, and return homeward under the defensive canopy of reciprocal support. In application, it was carnage. Japanese fighters tore into the formations with systematic brutality. A6M0s climbed elevated, positioned themselves with the sun behind their backs, and plummeted toward the Marines at closure velocities surpassing 500 miles per hour. The frontal assault became the characteristic method of Imperial Navy fighter squadrons. It was savage, productive, and mentally devastating. The Corsair possessed 650 caliber machine guns, but the Aviator possessed only moments to acquire, anticipate, and discharge before the adversary flashed beyond or through the formation. Most Marines descended without ever landing a significant strike on their assailants. The aviators understood it. The ground personnel understood it. The Japanese understood it. By February, casualty percentages on some missions surpassed 25%. Complete flights vanished over Rabaul Harbor or the maritime routes near Bougainville. Personnel flew their assignments in a condition of resigned perseverance, tallying missions like imprisonment days, understanding the probabilities were arranged against survival. Into this circumstance came thousands of youthful men who had never witnessed battle. Agricultural boys from Iowa, technicians from Detroit, college abandoners, and manufacturing workers who had volunteered or been conscripted into a conflict that demanded they ascend into aluminum cylinders and pilot into tempests of steel. They mastered formation control, oxygen administration, and how to direct a weapon through frozen gloves at elevation. But nobody instructed them how to survive when strategy failed. There was no handbook for that, just acceptance and fortune. VMF 124 attempted methods: denser formations, staggered elevations, fighter sweeps before the bombers when fuel permitted. But in early 1944, the Corsairs were extending their maximum distance just to reach objectives like Rabaul. They arrived depleted on fuel, participated under disadvantage, and rushed back to station, hoping their reservoirs would not exhaust over open ocean. The sound of it all was overwhelming and surreal. The thunder of radial power plants at cruise power, the clatter of gun emplacements being test discharged, the static of wireless communication, then the shriek of plummeting Zeros, the pounding of cannon fire, the liquid impact of projectiles striking tissue, and sometimes the dreadful quietness when a Corsair's power plant ceased and the aircraft commenced its descent toward the ocean. It was into this furnace that First Lieutenant James Holloway conducted his 23rd mission. James Holloway appeared unlike a man destined to reconstruct fighter methods. He was reserved, systematic, a contemplator more than a communicator. Born in Russell County, Kansas in 1918 to agricultural parents, he spent his youth surrounded by grain fields, dust tempests, and the persistent hum of farming machinery. His father operated 200 acres of wheat and corn. His mother maintained the accounts and raised 4 children. Holloway matured observing people resolve problems with restricted resources and no backup strategy. He mastered flying at 16, not in a military institution, but at a crop dusting enterprise outside Hayes. The proprietor, Frank Morrison, required assistance during harvest period. He proposed Holloway 25 cents an hour to combine chemicals and fuel aircraft. Holloway stated he desired to master flying instead. Morrison responded with amusement, then concurred. The instruction was severe and functional. No textbooks, no principles, just Morrison shouting directions from the earth as Holloway wrestled a damaged Stearman biplane through low-elevation runs over grain fields. Crop dusting instructed physics that no classroom could duplicate. Flying 10 feet off the earth at 90 miles per hour, interpreting terrain through peripheral sight, anticipating wind alterations by observing dust configurations, rotating sharply at the field boundary without stalling or striking a wing. Morrison's regulations were elementary. Fly low, fly smooth, never lose composure. If you ascend when you should rotate, you perish. If you freeze when you should respond, you perish. Holloway mastered rapidly, or he would have abandoned. The labor was hazardous and unforgiving. Aviators perished every season, striking power cables they never observed, misjudging clearance over tree boundaries, stalling in sharp rotations with no elevation to recover. Morrison lost 2 aviators in Holloway's initial summer. Both were practiced men who made singular errors. Holloway attended their burial services and comprehended that at 10 feet there was no tolerance for error. No subsequent opportunities, only physics and outcome. By 1937, Holloway had recorded over 300 hours, all of it beneath 100 feet. He could thread a steerman between barn and grain storage, roll inverted to examine a field, and descend on a county thoroughfare in a crosswind. Morrison stated he was the finest natural aviator he had ever instructed. But when Holloway attempted to enlist in Navy aviation, the recruiter examined his submission and responded with amusement. No college credential, no military background, foundation in farming. The Navy desired academy graduates and engineering scholars, not agricultural boys who possessed the odor of pesticide and power plant oil. Holloway attempted again in 1939. Rejected. He attempted the Army Air Corps. Rejected for age and educational inadequacy. Frustrated, he returned to Kansas and continued flying crop dusters, accumulating money, awaiting an opportunity that seemed improbable to arrive. Then Pearl Harbor occurred. December 7th, 1941 transformed everything. Enlistment criteria dropped immediately. The military required aviators desperately. Holloway entered a Marine Corps recruiting station in Topeka on December 10th. He passed the physical. He passed the aptitude examination. He signed the documents and departed for Pensacola for flight instruction in January 1942. He was 23 years old, more mature than most cadets, and carried himself with the reserved confidence of someone who had already survived 1,000 near collisions at treetop level. Flight instruction at Pensacola Naval Air Station exposed the division between Holloway and the other cadets. Most were college boys, rapid with mathematics and navigation principles, comfortable with military control and hierarchical command. Holloway was none of these. He struggled with classroom direction. He questioned procedures that seemed ineffective. He flew with a fluidity that instructors noted but could not quite explain. His descents were flawless. His aerobatics were adequate, but his approach to battle maneuvers felt incorrect, too unhurried, too careful, too much like a man preserving fuel over infinite grain fields. One instructor documented in his assessment, demonstrates excellent aircraft mastery, but lacks hostile instinct required for fighter functions. Recommend reassignment to transport or patrol assignment. Holloway disregarded the recommendation. He continued flying. He graduated in the center of his class, neither celebrated nor rejected, and received orders to Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point in North Carolina for advanced fighter instruction. Cherry Point introduced him to the F-4U Corsair, a massive, complex aircraft that frightened most new aviators. The Corsair was rapid, powerful, and unforgiving. It possessed a tendency to stall in sharp rotations. The extended nose obstructed forward sight during descent. The landing apparatus was narrow and susceptible to failure. Early models terminated more Marines in instruction accidents than in battle. Holloway cherished it. The Corsair reminded him of the overloaded crop dusters he had piloted, temperamental machines that demanded constant observation and fluid hands. He mastered its peculiarities. He piloted it the way Morrison had instructed him, low and accurate, never opposing the aircraft, always cooperating with it. His squadron companions at Cherry Point designated him the farmer. Some intended it as ridicule, others stated it with reluctant respect. He did not consume alcohol heavily or pursue excitement. He examined maintenance handbooks. He questioned crew supervisors about power plant performance at different elevations. He contemplated in systems how the aircraft moved, how formations functioned, where the weaknesses existed. His peers respected him, but did not completely comprehend him. He was capable, composed, and strangely fearless in a way that seemed less like swagger and more like computation. In November 1943, Holloway received orders to VMF 124, deploying to the South Pacific. He departed from San Diego in December, sailed through the Panama Canal, and arrived at Espiritu Santo in early January 1944. From there, he flew northward to Torquemada Airstrip on Bougainville, a muddy slash carved into the wilderness, residence to 2,000 Marines and a dozen barely operational Corsairs. His new squadron commander, Captain Richard Stafford, was a regulation-following official, a veteran of Guadalcanal who valued control and formation integrity. He did not encourage independent action. When Holloway commenced posing technical questions during briefings about low-elevation methods, Stafford answered sharply, "Strategy exists for a purpose. Aviators who deviate perish." The discussion concluded there, but Holloway continued contemplating. The problem confronting Marine fighter squadrons in early 1944 was not merely tactical, it was mathematical. F-4U Corsairs were being eliminated faster than substitutes could arrive. Japanese Zeros, particularly the A6M5 variant, dominated close-distance confrontations. The Zero was lighter, rotated more sharply at battle velocities, and ascended more rapidly beneath 15,000 feet. Its aviators were veterans tested over China, the Philippines, and 2 years of Pacific battle. They pursued in coordinated pairs, exploiting elevation and energy with surgical accuracy. Marine strategy acknowledged the disadvantage. Never rotate with a Zero. Employ velocity and elevation. Assault from overhead, disengage in a plunge. The methods functioned when conditions favored them. But protection missions to objectives, like Rabaul, stripped away those advantages. The Corsairs arrived at maximum distance, depleted on fuel, often attacked by Zeros, plummeting from superior elevation. Strategy stated to extend in a plunge and flee for station. Reality stated the bombers required protection, and fleeing meant abandoning them to carnage. The arithmetic was savage. In January 1944, VMF 124 lost 8 aviators in 4 weeks. Substitute aviators arrived inexperienced, instructed stateside against cooperative objectives and predictable scenarios. They endured an average of 6 missions before being terminated or wounded. The squadron functioned in a condition of constant depletion, rotating fresh faces into flight compartments still warm from the previous occupant. Intelligence summaries documented the problem in clinical terminology. Enemy methods favor vertical participation. Our fighters lack positional advantage at point of contact. Recommendations included improved early warning, more fuel capacity, enhanced formation control. None addressed the fundamental issue. When Zeros possessed elevation and selected the terms of participation, Marines perished. Holloway observed this configuration repeat mission after mission. He conducted escort to Rabaul, to Cavien, to Buka. He witnessed Zeros position themselves before the bombers, roll inverted, and plunge straight through the formation. He witnessed Corsairs attempt to ascend and meet them, losing velocity, becoming simple objectives. He witnessed wingmen break formation to pursue Zeros into rotating fights they could not prevail. He sketched diagrams in his notebooks, computing angles and energy conditions. Attempting to comprehend the geometry of why strategy kept failing, he commenced posing questions. What if we ceased attempting to ascend? What if we compelled them to fight at low elevation? His squadron companions examined him like he was irrational. Low elevation meant no escape. It meant piloting into the ocean if you misjudged. It violated every principle of fighter battle. Captain Stafford terminated the discussion during a briefing. "We obey strategy, Lieutenant." Dismissed. But Holloway could not abandon a growing conviction. The Corsair was heavier than a Zero with more powerful power plant and superior high-velocity handling. At low elevation, in dense air, those advantages might matter. And Holloway had spent 300 hours piloting 10 feet off the earth, mastering to interpret terrain, to employ ground effect, to maneuver in an environment where hesitation meant demise. He had survived by executing what seemed impossible. He wondered if the same principles might apply over water. Then arrived February 12, 1944. The mission that would test everything. The briefing chamber at Torquemada possessed the odor of mildew and cigarette smoke. Maps covered the walls displaying Japanese positions, known anti-aircraft concentrations, and the extended overwater route to Rabaul. Major William Grayson, the intelligence official, stood at the front with a wooden pointer, tapping locations on the chart. Objective is Rabaul Harbor. Bomber strike against maritime vessels and dock installations. 12 SBD Dauntless dive bombers, 6 Corsair escorts. Maximum distance mission. Fuel will be critical. He paused, letting that penetrate. Anticipate heavy fighter resistance. Intelligence reports at least 30 Zeros stationed at Rabaul and Taberah airfields. They will intercept. Standard methods apply. Preserve elevation. Protect the bombers. Disengage if overwhelmed. Questions? Holloway raised his hand. What elevation will the bombers be conducting? Grayson examined his notes. 14,000 feet on approach, plummeting to 8,000 for bomb runs. And if we get attacked from overhead at 14,000? Grayson's expression tightened. You obey strategy, Lieutenant. Extend, regroup, re-engage if possible. Next question. There were no more questions. The aviators filed out to their aircraft. Holloway walked to his Corsair, tail number 57, positioned in a revetment at the boundary of the strip. Sergeant Bill Mackenzie, his crew supervisor, was completing pre-flight examinations. Mackenzie was a Scottish immigrant, short, stocky, with grease-stained hands and a skeptical disposition. He had maintained Holloway's aircraft, flying through 3 months of functions, patching bullet punctures, scrounging parts, coaxing performance from a power plant that had long surpassed its rated hours. Mackenzie examined upward as Holloway approached. Fuel reservoirs topped off, sir. Weapons loaded, 600 projectiles per weapon. Oil pressure is operating a fraction elevated, but within tolerances. She'll pilot. Holloway nodded, then hesitated. Mac, I require you to execute something unusual. Mackenzie's eyes narrowed. How unusual? I require the weapon sight adjusted. Lower the aiming point 2 degrees. Mackenzie blinked. Sir, that'll disrupt your aim at normal battle distances. I understand. Execute it anyway. Mackenzie stared, then shrugged. Your burial, Lieutenant. Holloway ascended into the flight compartment. The seat was worn, the instruments familiar. He secured in, connected oxygen, examined controls. The Pratt & Whitney power plant coughed, caught, and settled into a rumbling idle. Around him, other Corsairs were initiating. Blue exhaust smoke drifting across the strip. Captain Stafford's voice crackled over the wireless. All flights report in. One by one, the aviators responded. Holloway keyed his microphone. 57, ready. The formation taxied to the runway, formed up, and departed into the gray morning heavens. They ascended slowly, forming a loose escort around the bombers. The course was north-northwest, over open ocean, toward Rabaul. Holloway settled into the rhythm of the flight, scanning instruments, observing the formation, preserving fuel. He possessed no way of understanding that in less than an hour, he would be solitary over enemy territory with a choice no strategy had prepared him for. The Zeros appeared 20 minutes from the objective. Holloway witnessed them first. Small specks elevated and forward, catching sunlight. He keyed his microphone. Hostiles, 12 o'clock, elevated. Angels 20. Captain Stafford's voice returned clipped and tense. All flights, preserve formation. Prepare to participate. The Zeros ascended higher, positioning themselves. This was textbook Japanese methods. Get overhead, get rapid, plunge through, and disperse the formation. The Marine Corsairs tightened up, attempting to present overlapping fields of discharge. The bombers droned onward, committed to their run. Then the Zeros rolled inverted and plummeted. 11 aircraft shrieking downward at over 500 miles per hour. 20mm cannons discharging streams of tracers. The heavens erupted. Stafford called the brake. Red flight, brake rightward. Blue flight, brake leftward. Holloway broke sharply, felt the G-forces compress him into the seat. A Zero flashed beyond, so proximate he could witness the aviator's face. He pulled around, attempting to acquire, but the Zero was already ascending away, Unreachable. Another Zero arrived from this 7 o'clock. Holloway snap-rolled, plummeted, extended. The Zero pursued. His wingman, Lieutenant Marcus Chen, called out, 57, you possess one on your tail. I witness him. Holloway forced the throttle forward, plummeted steeper. The Corsair accelerated. The Zero matched him. They were already at 8,000 feet and dropping rapidly. Strategy stated extend, employ velocity to separate, then zoom, ascend back to elevation. Holloway examined his fuel gauge. Half reservoirs, not sufficient to ascend and fight. He made a decision that defied every instinct. He forced the stick forward and continued plummeting. 6,000 feet, 4,000, 2,000. The ocean surface rushed upward, gray and infinite. The Zero aviator hesitated, uncertain. American fighters did not plunge to the deck. They ascended. This one was exhausting sky. Holloway leveled off at 50 feet above the waves. The Corsair trembled in ground effect, the dense air cushioning the aircraft. He throttled back slightly. Reduced velocity to 200 miles per hour. The Zero, still plummeting, overshot and had to pull up sharply to avoid the water. Holloway witnessed it flash overhead, the aviator fighting for mastery. Now 2 more Zeros plummeted on him. Holloway executed something no one in the Pacific theater had ever attempted. He piloted the Corsair like a crop duster. He jinked sharply leftward, then rightward, skimming wave crests, employing the ocean swells as terrain. The Zeros attempted to pursue, but at 50 feet they lost sight picture. The water beneath confused their depth perception. They pulled upward, repositioned. Holloway continued moving. Brutal banks, sudden ascents to 100 feet, then drops back to wave level. He was interpreting the ocean, the way he had interpreted grain fields, anticipating, responding, never maintaining a steady line. The Zeros circled, frustrated, unable to establish a clean discharge. The maneuver possessed no designation. Holloway was functioning on pure instinct now, instinct carved from 300 hours of piloting crop dusters through Kansas fields at sunrise. He banked sharply leftward, the Corsair's wingtip nearly touching foam. A Zero plummeted from overhead, cannon fire stitching the water 20 yards behind him. Holloway pulled upward sharply to 100 feet, the sudden ascent losing velocity. But compelling the Zero to adjust its plummeting angle, the Japanese aviator pulled out late, flashed beneath Holloway, and had to ascend away to avoid plowing into the ocean. 2 more Zeros repositioned, arriving from opposite sides, attempting to box him. Holloway witnessed them converging. He executed something Morrison had instructed him over grain fields. He rolled inverted, pulled through, and reversed direction so brutally that the airframe groaned. The Zeros, committed to their intercept angles, discharged beyond each other, their formations disrupted. One aviator ascended, the other broke rightward, momentarily confused. Holloway dropped back to 50 feet. The ocean surface was his terrain now. He interpreted the swells, the wind configurations, the way sunlight reflected off the water. He jinked rightward, pursuing the trough of a wave, then snap-rolled leftward as another Zero made a gunnery pass. The dense air at sea level gave the Corsair unexpected stability. Ground effect cushioned the aircraft, reducing the requirement for constant trim adjustments. The Corsair's weight, a disadvantage at elevation, became an anchor here, preventing it from being thrown around by turbulence. The Zeros were struggling. At 50 feet, their velocity advantage evaporated. They could not plunge on him without risking a water impact. They could not rotate with him at this elevation without losing sight of the horizon. Holloway was piloting in an environment they had never instructed for, employing the ocean as a wall that compressed their assault geometry. He throttled upward, accelerated to 250 miles per hour, and piloted straight for 30 seconds. 3 Zeros lined up behind him, thinking they possessed him cornered. Holloway waited, counted silently, then chopped throttle and deployed 15 degrees of flap. The Corsair decelerated brutally. The lead Zero overshot, its aviator yanking back on the stick to avoid collision. The second Zero broke leftward. The third pulled upward. Holloway retracted flaps, added power, and rotated inside the ascending Zero's arc. For the first time in the participation, he possessed a firing solution. He compressed the trigger. 650 caliber machine guns hammered. Tracers walked across the Zero's fuselage. Smoke poured from its power plant. The Zero rolled rightward, streaming fuel, and augured into the ocean 200 yards forward. The remaining Zeros circled higher, uncertain. American fighters did not fight like this. They did not stay low. They did not employ the water as a shield. This aviator was breaking every regulation, and it was functioning. Holloway examined his fuel gauge. Less than a quarter reservoir. He possessed maybe 20 minutes before the power plant ceased. He rotated southward, staying at 50 feet, jinking randomly, making himself an impossible objective. The Zeros pursued for a few minutes, then broke off, unwilling to consume fuel pursuing a single aircraft at wavetop level. Holloway was solitary. The flight back to Torokina demanded 43 minutes. Holloway stayed at 50 feet until he crossed into Allied airspace, then ascended slowly to preserve fuel. His power plant coughed twice, starved for gasoline, but continued operating. He raised the tower on the wireless. 57, requesting priority descent, low fuel. The tower cleared him immediately. He brought the Corsair in on fumes, contacted downward sharply, and rolled to a halt at the end of the runway. The power plant ceased as he rotated off the taxiway. Ground personnel ran toward him. Holloway unbuckled, ascended out, and stood on the wing, legs trembling from adrenaline and fatigue. Sergeant Mackenzie arrived first, staring at the aircraft. "Sir, your wings are covered in salt mist. How low were you piloting?" "Lower than I should have been," Holloway stated quietly. Captain Stafford arrived minutes hence, alive but furious. His Corsair had taken strikes in the fight, and he had lost one aviator, Lieutenant Chen, Holloway's wingman. Stafford walked upward, jaw tight. "Where the hell were you, Holloway? You disappeared off the wireless." "Participated at low elevation, sir. I possessed 11 Zeros on me." Stafford blinked. 11? "Yes, sir." Holloway's voice was composed, factual. "They attacked me after the initial break. I went to the deck, piloted wavetop level, employed ground effect and terrain masking. They could not establish clean assaults. I eliminated one confirmed, damaged two more, and broke contact." Stafford stared. "You piloted at wavetop level for how long?" "Approximately 18 minutes, sir." "That is irrational. You violated strategy. You risked the aircraft." "I preserved the aircraft, sir, and myself." Stafford opened his mouth, then closed it. He examined Mackenzie. "Confirm his weapon camera footage." The film was developed within hours. Intelligence officials observed, in quietness as the grainy black and white footage displayed a Corsair piloting impossibly low, skimming waves, executing maneuvers that seemed to defy physics. They witnessed Zeros overshooting, struggling, breaking off. They witnessed the splash of the confirmed termination. Major Grayson operated the film 3 times, taking notes. He called Holloway in for debriefing that evening. "Explain your methods, Lieutenant." Holloway described the maneuver methodically. Piloting at 50 feet compressed the assault geometry. Ground effect gave stability. The Corsair's weight prevented it from being bounced around. Brutal jinking made acquisition difficult. The ocean surface created a visual reference that confused enemy depth perception. Grayson listened, then posed the critical question, "Can this be instructed?" Holloway hesitated. "It requires comfort at extremely low elevation." Most aviators are not instructed for it, but yes, with practice, it can be instructed. Word spread through the ready chamber that night. Aviators gathered around Holloway, posing questions, demanding details. Lieutenant Jack Brennan, fresh from stateside instruction, desired to understand how proximate to the water he actually piloted. Holloway maintained his hand 3 feet off the table. This proximate, sometimes closer. The chamber went silent. Other aviators who had attempted low-elevation flight understood the tolerance for error was non-existent. One error, one moment of distraction, and the ocean became a concrete wall at 200 miles per hour. Within a week, Grayson submitted a classified tactical report to Marine Corps Aviation Command. The report included weapon camera footage, Holloway's debrief, and a recommendation to incorporate low-elevation evasion methods into instruction syllabi. The response was careful but interested. VMF 124 was authorized to conduct experimental instruction flights. Holloway was assigned to instruct. Holloway conducted 16 more battle missions before his assignment concluded in May 1944. He instructed 6 aviators in low-elevation methods. 3 survived the conflict. The technique spread quietly through Marine squadrons in the Pacific. Aviators designated it crop dusting or wave hopping. Intelligence reports from captured Japanese aviators mentioned American fighters employing unpredictable, low-elevation evasion over water. One report described it as piloting like a frightened bird skimming the ocean. By summer 1944, Corsair casualty percentages in the Solomons had dropped by 12%. Not all of it was due to Holloway's methods. New aircraft arrived. Aviator instruction improved. Japanese resistance weakened as their experienced aviators were terminated. But the shift in strategy, the willingness to fight at wave-top level when necessary, became a permanent component of Marine fighter functions. Holloway returned to the United States in June. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for his actions over Rabaul. The citation mentioned exceptional airmanship and innovative methods. It did not mention crop dusting. He spent the remainder of the conflict as an instructor at Cherry Point, instructing new aviators energy management and low-elevation maneuvering. He never boasted. He never claimed to have transformed anything. He simply instructed what he understood. When the conflict concluded, Holloway returned to Kansas. He married a school instructor named Helen in 1946. They purchased a farm outside Hayes, 200 acres of wheat and corn. Holloway piloted crop dusters again, instructing the next generation of agricultural aviators the same techniques Morrison had instructed him. He communicated rarely about the conflict. When pressed, he would state only that he executed what the situation demanded. He perished in 1983 at the age of 65 of cardiac failure, quietly in his sleep. His obituary in the Russell County Register mentioned his military service and his labor as a crop duster. It did not mention Rabaul. Most people who examined it did not understand what he had contributed. But in Marine Corps instruction handbooks, the technique survived. Low-elevation evasion became a standard component of fighter methods. Modern aviators mastered ground effect exploitation, terrain masking, and high-G defensive maneuvering at sea level. The principles are instructed without attribution, encoded in strategy, stripped of their origin narrative. In flight academies today, instructors still reference the Rabaul incident when instructing defensive methods. Though few understand the aviator's designation, they display weapon camera footage of a Corsair dancing at wave-top level, defying physics and strategy simultaneously. The scholars observe in quietness, witnessing what their predecessors witnessed 80 years ago. A farmer who comprehended that survival sometimes meant piloting where angels feared to tread. Holloway's legacy was not inscribed in medals or monuments. It was inscribed in the survival of aviators who employed his methods decades hence, in the strategy that quietly incorporated his insights, in the comprehension that sometimes the safest place to pilot is where instinct states never to go. The concept endured. The man faded. That was how he would have desired it.